A tarnished breath fogs the rune's sickly glow. Marika's hand, elevated by the greater will, planted the Erdtree to bind rot at its root. What did she fear more than death? The tree's slow, inevitable withering. The rune wasn't a curse. It was a key to delay the end. Why hide it? Planted the Erdtree to bind rot at its root. Marika knew the Erdtree's rot was inevitable. The Rune of Death was no weapon. It was her final pact with the greater will, a leash on decay itself. Why deny its use? Because divinity's true face is not glory but compromise. A god cannot stop death. They can only delay it, thread by thread, until the fabric tears. What does a queen sacrifice to buy time for a dying god? Her own humanity. The crucible burned with Marika's own breath, a stolen flame from her divine ribs. Her bones cracked like splintering oak as the rune took shape, a shard of void black iron, cold even in the fire. The air reeked of ozone and blood, a hymn to the greater will's silent approval. She had seen the vision, the Erdtree's golden leaves rotting to ash, its roots gnawing at the world's spine. Her hands, once smooth as moonlight, now bore the soot of mortality. When the Elden ring shattered, its fragments fell like dying stars. Marika's scream was the first sound the lands between knew. Godwin's corpse crumpled beneath her feet, his faithless eyes staring at the sky she had sworn to protect. The Erdtree sprouted in the Altus Plateau's heart, its sap a syrup of gold and grief. She buried the rune where the plateau's wind howled coldest, in a crevice choked with frost and silence. Did she weep? The greater will does not weep. Yet as her fingers closed around the rune's edge, she felt the weight of 1,000 borrowed years. A queen's sacrifice is not in her blood, but in what she hides. In the hollow core of Marika's vault, the Rune of Death waits, not a blade, not a flame. A whisper that unknits the weave of the Erdtree's rot. To wield it is to hold the final breath of a dying star. The demigods rage over shattered Elden shards, blind to the truth. Their war accelerates what the rune would slow. Its power does not sever corruption, it dissolves the distinction between decay and life. The lands between, fractured by the shattering, would not mend. They would vanish. A queen's sacrifice is not in blood, but in silence. Marika saw the end beyond the demigod's greed. The Erdtree's death is not a wound, but a wound's erasure. To unravel its withered roots is to erase the scars of 1,000 borrowed years. What good is immortality if the world forgets it ever lived? The rune does not heal, it forgets. The first flame's embers would smother, not reignite. No ashes, no memory, only the void's patient, hungry breath. The demigods carve their thrones from a corpse's bones. They do not weep for the tree that fed it. But Marika knew, to preserve the Erdtree's lie is to deny its agony. To wield the rune is to grant it oblivion. Would the lands between be better unmade, or worse, remembering? The rune's price is not death. It is the end of remembering why one lived, and in that silence, the greater will's judgment waits. The knights of Lordran bore false relics. The hunters of the dream clutched hollow shells. The demigods, in their gilded rage, carved the Elden ring's shards from dust. Godwin's flame guttered in the dark eye's path, never crossed the rune's shadow. Marika, body split between light and shadow, cradled its weight as the Erdtree cracked, not as a weapon, not as a gift. As a wound that would not heal, her final act to sever the rune from the world's tongue. Let the demigods bleed over fragments, let the tarnished stumble through ash and rot. The rune's truth was never theirs to speak. Only to remember, and Marika's rage was this, to make them forget, to let the greater will choke on its own silence. The Rune of Death was no weapon, it was a name erased from the stars, a debt unpaid. And in the void where Marika's hand once closed around it, the Erdtree's rot waits, not for a hero, not for a savior. For the one who dares to remember what was never meant to be remembered, who will bear that weight. The question is a blade, and the answer, a grave. The rune whispers not of power but of fracture. Marika's hand withheld the chisel, not the blade. What blooms in its glow is not death but the face of immortality, cracked. A safeguard against the tree's rot and a mirror to the rot within. Divinity does not decay, it becomes the decay. And still the question hangs, who dare look? The rune lies in a crypt colder than the void between stars. Its surface is polished blackstone, etched with glyphs that pulse like dying embers. To touch it is to feel the weight of 1,000 forgotten vows. Marika carved it in the twilight of her reign, when the Erdtree's roots had begun to sour. She worked in silence, chiseling not with malice but precision, as if sculpting a truth too sharp for mortal tongues. The air thickened with the scent of burning myrrh, her own incense, not the censers of her priests. One final act, one final lie. One demanded sacrifice, yet the will had no face to accept hers. A heartbeat echoed in the chamber, Marika's blade striking the stone. She had worn the same glove for centuries, its leather stiff with dried blood not from war, but from the ritual cuts that bound her to the tree. That night she severed the glove, letting her blood pool into the rune's grooves. A god's blood is not life, but dissolution. The glyphs flared, then dimmed. She did not weep. To mourn would be to admit the cycle had broken. It had not. It could not. The rune is no weapon. It is a mirror. Those who gaze into its polished depths see not their reflection, but the rot beneath their skin, the slow unraveling of all things. Marika's rebellion was not in destroying the tree, but in proving its fragility. She withheld the rune not to save the world, but to remind it, even gods age, even gods die. The Erdtree's salvation was never in its branches, but in the hands that dared to let it fall. Beneath the Altus Plateau, where the Erdtree's roots choke on ancient ichor, the Rune of Death lies encased in blackened crystalline. Faint whispers coil through the air, Marika's essence humming in the stone. The ground here is frigid, a silence punctuated only by the distant groan of the tree's slow combustion. Some endings see its bark char to ash, others stand eternal, a monument to hubris. The rune pulses, a heartbeat of negation, sealed by a god's last breath. A knight once reached for it, fingers brushing cold void, then Marika's voice, a blade of light, shattered his resolve. Dust now, ash. The world above prays for salvation in branches, but down here the truth festers. The only cure is the wound. The rune waits not for a hero, but for the day the stars forget their names, or remember too late. The Rune of Death is no weapon, only a whisper of what Marika could not unmake. Outsiders carved their hopes into dying stars, yet even their blood could not mend what rot consumed from within. The demigods fell not to evil, but to the arithmetic of time lineage fractured, power diluted until even gods grew brittle. Marika's silence was no cruelty. She knew the truth all keepers learn, some doors exist only to remain sealed. The rune's weight is the weight of knowing. To wield it is to grasp that salvation is a myth sold to the desperate, that the Erdtree's gold is rust in disguise. What did she guard the world from? Not chaos, but clarity, the knowledge that every cure is a wound reopened. The player's pathash is to Ashesis the only language the lands between understands. Marika's final act was not to destroy, but to withhold. A parent burying a key where no hand may dig. The rune's silence is the silence of a god who saw the end. And in that silence the cycle breathes. What remains when the stars forget their names? The same thing that always remains. The same thing that always fades. What if the Rune of Death was the key to ending the cycle? Every cycle offers a choice: link, let fade, or usurp. Marika's withheld rune was no curse, a safeguard against the inevitable. Why bury the key to endings? What dies when the tree falls?